Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. My name is Nina Bola, and I work at the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre based in Cambridge. I'd like to take the time today to reflect on the role of protected areas and what they do for climate change adaptation and mitigation. I would like to give you some examples of how protected areas offer a natural solution towards helping natural and social systems to adapt to the effects of climate change, but in themselves are not a substitute for recognizing the deeper transitions that have to happen across our society. They must be implemented as a part of a wider strategy to decarbonize economies as well as maintain, sustainably manage and restore biodiversity-rich ecosystems. So what are protected areas? Protected areas are a clearly defined geographic space managed for the long-term conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity is all forms of life on Earth, including species, ecosystems, and genetic diversity. According to the World Database on Protected Areas, an authoritative source on data on protected areas, managed by the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, there are now over 260,000 known protected areas. Protected areas can range from places that are strictly protected, for example, some national parks across the world, such as Bhutan or Colombia, where human visitation is controlled, to protected landscapes and seascapes, where people and nature coexist, for example, in the United Kingdom, such as the Peak District National Park. Millions of people depend on protected areas for a variety of reasons, and that's why they are so important, either directly or indirectly. For example, protected areas provide ecosystems to people that include provision of clean water from rivers and lakes for millions of people who live in and around cities, pollination services for crop production for people living around the world, flood control and prevention for people living across coastlines, income generation and recreation from tourism in protected areas for people across the nation at large. If we recognize how important protected areas are, then how are protected areas being impacted from climate change? And what is the problem? If we take time to think about our oceans and coasts, according to an IPCC special report on climate change, we know that the consequences of a 1-degree change in global warming is already being widely observed and felt around the world. We see more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and diminishing Arctic sea ice, among other changes. These changes result in a variety of climate-related hazards, such as coastal storms, flooding, affecting millions of lives of people, as well as natural ecosystems, such as reefs, seagrass meadows, kelp forests, mangrove forests, and the species that depend on these ecosystems. So limiting warming to 1.5 degrees will require a transformation across all sectors, including the energy, agriculture, industry, amongst other sectors. If we look a little bit further inland, hazards such as landslides and soil erosion may occur, which are linked to deforestation and land degradation. High carbon ecosystems, including forests and peatlands, are being destroyed and degraded to provide food for people and livestock, as well as energy to people around the world. Think of the extent to which deforestation occurs in the Amazon. Not only does the loss of natural habitats cause devastating effects on species, such as changing population levels and migration patterns, but also contributes towards climate change by adding billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere. Well, how can protected areas contribute towards climate change mitigation? For context, recent studies have shown that nature is a key part of the climate solution and has the potential to supply more than 1/3 of climate mitigation needs, which is a huge amount, but only if there is a change in land management strategies all over. So thinking about land management changes in agriculture, in the transport, in the industry and energy sectors. We know protecting forests capture and store additional carbon from the atmosphere. But as mentioned in previous slides, many forests around the world are being destroyed. The main contribution to reducing emissions is through halting the loss and degradation of forests. If we restore degraded protected areas and designate new areas in threatened landscapes, we can make a positive contribution to climate change mitigation while protecting many threatened species, if these areas are effectively managed. Protected areas can maintain ecosystem services that support human adaptation and allow ecosystems to cope with the impacts of climate change. For example, managing habitats effectively to protect or restore mangrove forests help maintain their protective function by trapping sediment and therefore reducing the speed at which waves hit the coastline, and at the same time protects the biodiversity that depends on mangrove forests. If we think about the opportunities for protected areas, we can think about well-designed networks of protected areas that help and increase their role in climate change mitigation and adaptation. For example, increases in species resilience to climate change by enabling populations to move across the landscape. Even under present conditions, you can see how jaguar populations in this slide use ecological corridors that enable this species to safely move across vast distances and across a myriad of land uses. So just to conclude, protected areas support climate change adaptation and mitigation while providing other ecosystem services. But there is a need to go beyond protected areas and think of the wider land and seascape, and recognize that protected areas need to go hand in hand with other strategies and management approaches. And it's really important to recognize the strong linkages between people and biodiversity and climate. With this, I'd just like to thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. And thank you for your attention.